The Texas Longhorns did what they were supposed to do. They beat up badly 49-17 on a bad and injured Florida Gators football team today.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. My immediate reaction to watching the Texas Longhorns dominate the Florida Gators at home, coming off the bye week, coming off of two shaky performances against Georgia and Vanderbilt. This was a get-right game for the Texas Longhorns, and get right they did, 49-17 against the Florida Gators at home. All of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, immediate reaction to the Texas Longhorns beating up on the Florida Gators, and now you have 3 games left on your regular season schedule. If you win out, you should be in the SEC championship game and secure your spot in the playoffs. All you have to do is keep doing what they did today against the Florida Gators, and that's play Texas Longhorns football on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And when you looked at it coming into this game, the spread was 21.5 points for a reason. Right. Just no disrespect to, the Florida Gators and everything that they're dealing with right now. But at this point, these programs are on 2 completely different levels. And at this point, these 2 teams are on 2 completely different levels. This game was never going to be close. I remember last week I put out a show and said the Texas Longhorns will dominate and blow out the Florida Gators, right? Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. And you had Florida fans saying, I was being disrespectful and I was talking trash. You had Texas fans saying that, it's still the SEC. It's still college football. Anything could happen. This game could be close. I mean, that has to be coming from a place of PTSD, right? When you look at Texas, even, albeit the way they've looked over the last couple of weeks, and when you look at Florida, like I said, Vegas, who's smarter than all of us, had this as a 21.5 point spread for a reason. I said that Texas would win 38-10. And, they won by even more than that, winning 49-17. This is a Florida Gators team who is on their 3rd string quarterback, a redshirt freshman quarterback from Yale who didn't even start at Yale, right? Missing their starting running back, missing, I think, 2 of their 3 starting wide receivers, missing 2 offensive linemen, and then missing 4 starting DBs defensively. Going against one of the best teams in the country, a legitimate national championship contender, a legitimate SEC championship contender. This game was just never going to be close, but it was important for Texas to not come out and play with their food. It was important for Texas to come out and beat a Florida team the way that they did today, because that's what should have happened, and they went out there and made it happen on the field. And how crazy was it that on Thursday, just 2 days ago, right, with everything that we heard surrounding this Florida program coming into the season and just, throughout the way that things have looked, Florida made the decision to come out and say, we're going to keep Billy Napier. Now, whether that's going to be a good decision or not remains to be seen, right? He could come back next year with DJ Lagway and they could have an amazing year in the SEC. And like Jesse Palmer said on the broadcast, you do have to come out and say it kind of early to let recruits know that Billy Napier will be here. Right. And so there's not going to be a coaching change. If you come to the University of Florida, you will be playing for Billy Napier. So you do have to say it early to kind of solidify that recruiting class. But I think it's crazy that you came out and gave him that vote of confidence before they played Texas. Like, not before they played LSU, not before they played Florida State, but before they played Texas. And now what you've said is we're sticking behind our guy no matter what. The team did show some fight, but ultimately they just got beat by 32 points to a conference opponent. So once again, just shout out the Texas Longhorns for doing exactly what they were supposed to do against an inferior opponent in the Florida Gators, who obviously are dealing with a lot of injuries. I want to give a shout out to Quinn Ewers, right? I think the biggest story was Quinn Ewers, and I think this was his biggest game of the season, his best game of the season. Maybe you can say Michigan, just because of the stakes at the time. But, I mean, Michigan hasn't looked too much better than Florida this season. But I just thought Quinn Ewers was on fire. When you look at the stat line, 19 for 27, 333 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Just a huge bounce-back game from our signal caller. Didn't look great against Georgia, obviously. Georgia makes a lot of quarterbacks look like that. We expected a little bit more from Quinn Ewers in that game. And just didn't have his best performance. Got benched, came back, made some plays, but ultimately not the type of performance you want to see from your third-year quarterback quarterback. Then, he comes out making some plays, throwing the ball, getting a lot of completions, wasn't really throwing the ball down the field, but, had a lot of completions against Vanderbilt, looked good in that game. Texas is up 14, but then he turns the ball over twice. And then Texas ends up in an onside kick situation at the end of the game with Vandy where, it possibly could have gone either way. So Quinn Ewers had turned the ball over, in 4 straight games, 4 of the 5 games that he had played in this year. And so, I thought that this was a big opportunity for him to come out and kind of silence the doubters, right? Silence the doubters that were saying Arch Manning should be the starting quarterback. Silence the doubters that saying Quinn Ewers has not looked the same since he did at the beginning of the season, and people questioning if Quinn Ewers has been doing enough or had done enough over the last couple of weeks to put himself in a good position to be drafted when the draft comes early on, when the draft comes early on, putting himself in good position to be one of the first quarterbacks taken, I should say. And I thought he really came out and did everything in his power to silence all of those doubters today against Florida. Once again, 333 yards and 5 touchdowns. Really all coming in the first half. I can't remember if he had a passing touchdown in the third quarter, but he did most of his work in the first half. And I thought the biggest thing for Quinn Ewers today was his ability to throw the ball down the field, right? We've seen so often with this year, him having an average depth of target less than 6 yards, it really being a conversation this week to Steve Sarkisian, to Gunnar Helm, the players being asked about it. I had a feeling that Texas would come out and try to push the ball down the field, right? Everybody's asking, why is Quinn Ewers, not throwing the ball down the field? Why is Texas throwing so many screens? What's going on with this offense? I had a feeling that Steve Sarkisian would get in Quinn Ewers' ear and say, we need to throw the ball down the field. And I don't have the Pro Football Focus data yet. We'll have it, as soon as they drop it. But that certainly was his best game of the year in terms of pushing the ball down the field and his average depth of target. Like I said, he's been hovering around 6 all year. I would expect that in this game, it was probably 8, 9, if not higher, right? You saw him just looking down the field, making his reads. And then the offensive line did a really good job of, protecting him and giving him the opportunity to push the ball down the field. The wide receivers did a really good job of getting open, right? So he wasn't throwing 50-50 balls down the field. All he had to do was kind of drop it in the bucket or put it in an area to where the wide receivers can catch it. And I thought Steve Sarkisian, with his concepts, did a really good job of allowing wide receivers or putting wide receivers in position to be open down the field. So all Quinn Ewers had to do was make those easy throws. Earlier in the season, really in almost every game we saw Quinn Ewers play up until this point, he was always making the short read first, right? Looking for the screen or looking for the check down or looking for, a short pass across the middle instead of looking deep and then coming back short if nothing was there, right? This game, we saw him hunting those deep opportunities, and he really hit on almost all the ones that he threw, right? He had the one that was dropped by DeAndre Moore. He had another one where DeAndre Moore should have caught it, and he bobbled it in the end zone. Maybe one that was a little bit behind Isaiah Bond, but for the most part, he was on time and on target with those deep throws. And we now see that it's not just with Arch Manning in the game, right? There are opportunities for Quinn Ewers to push the ball down the field, and he was able to do that at a high level. So really loved the growth that we saw from him today. Once again, just accurate, on time, pushing the ball down the field, being explosive with the football, but still being able to take those short opportunities, right? You were able to get a completion of 45 yards to Jaden Blue, throwing it to him short. You were able to get a completion of 50 yards for a touchdown to Trey Wisner, throwing it to him short, and then another 34-yard touchdown to Isaiah Bond, throwing a screen pass to him. So I love the balance in the offense today in terms of passing, going deep, but also keeping those short opportunities where our playmakers can get out in space and make people miss and hit their head on the goalpost. So really good game for Quinn Ewers. I think the best game of the season. Really nice bounce back performance from him. Quick word for our sponsors, and then we get into the rest of the team. Just a dominant all-around performance today against the Florida Gators, 49-17 once again. All right. I thought a big reason that this offense looked a lot more explosive than it has the last couple of weeks was the return of Isaiah Bond, right? We have a lot of playmakers in that wide receiver room, but I think that Isaiah Bond is certainly the alpha. When you talk about the number one wide receiver and just the best playmaker that we have in that room, and I think it showed up today. He's played, in instances over the last couple of weeks, but you can tell he just wasn't 100%. And a lot of times when we see those hamstring injuries that happened against Oklahoma, those soft tissue injuries, it takes time for guys to really come back and play at a high level, especially somebody like Isaiah Bond, who's running all over the field, running as fast as he can, trying to be explosive. a hamstring injury obviously would take a lot away from Isaiah Bond, but he certainly looked healthy in this game and just brought a lot of juice to this offense. And anytime you can get the ball in his hands, anytime you throw the ball his way, he's just a threat to hit his head on the goalpost. We saw that today. 44-yard run, right? A huge run for Isaiah Bond. He's done that a couple times this year when we've given him opportunities out of the backfield. He's taken, those plays or taking those opportunities and made big plays down the field. He had the 34-yard touchdown reception where you just get it to him really quickly on a screen pass, and he makes a couple people miss, and just with his speed hits his head on the goalpost. He was wide open, on that play in the first quarter early on in the game where Quinn Ewers was getting in the rhythm and Cormani McClain fell on the route. I can't remember exactly what the play was or exactly what the route was, but Cormani McClain fell and Isaiah Bond was just wide open, right? Nobody in front of him, just green grass. Quinn Ewers was a little bit behind him. That would have been a 70, 80-yard touchdown pass, but he missed him there. But that's another play where he's wide open. You just put the ball anywhere in his radius, right? And he's going to take it and score 7. And then there was a play in the third quarter where he was triple covered down the field. I think Dijon Johnson, kind of got 2 hands on him, pushed him to the ground on a play where Arch Manning threw the ball down the field when he first came in the game. And he should have drawn a pass interference there that would have given, Texas 15 yards and a fresh set of downs. So Isaiah Bond really coming back and being healthy in this offense just brought a lot of juice to this football team. And, it's no secret. It's one of the biggest reasons why they had their best performance over the last couple of weeks, or at least since the Oklahoma game where he got hurt initially. I want to give this defense a lot of credit, right? I want to move on to the defense and talk about the defense because they just continue to amaze me every weekly, weekly, right? They continue to amaze me and they continue to, kind of put their name in the conversation, or they've earned the right to be in the conversation for the best defense in the country. Early on, everybody wanted to say, well, they haven't played anybody. And, they did play Georgia, even though Carson Beck has an interception problem. They did play Vanderbilt, who was giving a lot of teams trouble offensively. And I know Florida, like I said, is missing, running backs, wide receivers, offensive linemen, and their top 2 quarterbacks. But you have to play who's in front of you, right? And Texas has, for 9 weeks now, shown up and played elite defense on that side of the ball, right? And when you look at it, I think what I continue to say is one of the biggest things that shows me that this Texas defense is elite is the fact that they continue to show up and force turnovers every single week. And I thought the player that on this defense really just jumped off the screen for everybody today in terms of the, Texas Longhorns was Alfred Collins, right? Just the plays that he continued to make. I mean, he was making so many plays, he started making them accidentally, right? Where he tripped that one player that was going to walk into the end zone on the touchdown pass, but just 2 big tips of the ball. When Aiden Warner was trying to throw the ball, and, Alfred Collins was able to tip the ball twice. One time, Ty Anthony Smith caught it for an interception and got the ball back to the offense. And then another time, Andrew Makuba, who was returning from a knee injury, caught the pass and got an interception. So, Alfred Collins' ability to just blow things up front, a la Tavondre Sweat or a Byron Murphy really helped out the back end in terms of this game, just, causing havoc for that offensive line and Aiden Warner. Then you saw Anthony Hill, on top of those 2 turnovers, he forced a fumble early in the game that I thought really got Texas in rhythm, really got Texas going. I believe Trey Moore recovered that fumble, and then Texas was able, to go in and get a score, I believe, on that drive. If that's not the one where Bert Auburn, missed the field goal. Either way, I'm getting old. And then Trey Moore, right? Trey Moore, one of the, prized additions coming over from UTSA, one of the best sack artists in college football over the last couple of seasons. Would you believe that he had not had a sack up until this point, right? In the first 8 games of the season, he did not have a sack, but he was still making plays in the run game, making plays, getting tackles for loss, really doing a lot of the things that you want to see from your defensive end. He really just was not getting the sacks to, show for it, even getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback throughout the first 8 games. But once again, just didn't have the sack numbers to show for it. Finally got that monkey off his back and got his first sack of the season in this game. So the defense was just phenomenal. I know they allowed almost 200 yards rushing. Let me see. I think it was 197 yards rushing. Florida was able to kind of get that going, and, they wanted to do that to take pressure off a young quarterback in Aiden Warner. And then there was a point where they were down like 42-3, where they stopped just trying to throw the ball all over the yard, and got some good plays going in the running game. But, nonetheless, the number one pass defense in the country once again showed up and showed out and limited Florida to 132 passing yards on 25 attempts, right? So they were trying to push the ball down the field. They were trying to make plays with Aiden Warner. They were just unable to. 2 turnovers in terms of interceptions that way in the passing game, but also just consistently making plays, right? Consistently being there at the catch point, knocking the ball down and just providing really good coverage to where Aiden Warner had nowhere to go with the football. So love the fact that this defense just continues to show up and show out, ball out every weekly. And like I said, they have solidified their name in the conversation for the best defense in the country through 9 weeks now. A defense that has forced over 20 turnovers this season and has forced a turnover, at least one, in all 9 games this season, one of the best units in the country. I love the fact that we were able to get the run game going, even though it was at the end of the game somewhat in garbage time, right? I thought the first half was all about making Quinn Ewers comfortable. So I really didn't have a problem that we didn't lean on the running game like we would in previous opportunities or in previous matchups, right? It was like, let Quinn Ewers throw the ball all over the yard. But then when Arch Manning came in, it's like, okay, let's get the running game going. Surprisingly, Trey Wisner only had 4 carries, I think for either 0 yards or like negative yards, but he did have the big play, did put his imprint on the game with the 50-yard, touchdown pass that he took to the end zone. But when you look at it, Jaden Blue and Jared Gibson combined for 21 carries, 160 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jared Gibson did have the fumble that led to a touchdown for Florida. So hopefully, he doesn't end up in the doghouse after that. We saw what happened to Jaden Blue. But nonetheless, 31 carries for 210 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, the 44-yard run by Isaiah Bond was a big part of that. But you were able to get the running game going, albeit, in garbage time against this Florida defense. Then I thought it was great that Arch Manning got to come in the game and, get some meaningful, or not meaningful snaps, but, I think it's all meaningful for who's going to be your starting quarterback next year. I think any experience is good experience for Arch Manning, even though he only threw 6 passes, even though he really came in the game to, just hand the ball off and, keep Quinn Ewers fresh and healthy. Like I said, I think any experience for this point at Arch Manning is going to be really good for him going into next season. So just a dominant performance on offense, defense. Bert Auburn missed the kick, but we'll say special teams, when you dominate a team 49-17, everybody does their part. Coaching, just an amazing performance. Like I said, coming off a bye week where everybody had questions about this Texas Longhorns football team after the loss to Georgia and after a shaky performance from Vanderbilt. So a quick word from our sponsors, and then we wrap it all up. What we saw today in a dominant performance from the Texas Longhorns. So as I said last week, this was an opportunity for Texas to have a get-right game, right? The team that we saw the first 6 weeks of the season looked like one of the best, teams in the country, looked like a national championship contender, looked like, the favorite, to go into the SEC championship game and possibly win it, and was on a short list of teams that could possibly be the best team in the country. Right. And then we, saw them get punched in the mouth against Georgia. We started to see some vulnerabilities and some chinks in the armor. You had an opportunity to get right against a Vanderbilt team who has played good football against, everybody they've lined up against this year. And while it looked good in the first half, things kind of started to, get shaken up a little bit in the second half. Right. And you're kind of wondering, okay, is Texas, our team starting to figure out Texas? Our team starting to figure out Steve Sarkisian in this offense? Our team starting to figure out, Quinn Ewers, and forcing him into some turnovers? Can teams run the ball on this defense? Is Texas not as good as we thought they were? Right. And albeit, against a Florida team, like I said, who's beaten up, right, who's on their 3rd string quarterback, who has a lot of injuries offensively and defensively, and, obviously aren't world beaters. They came out and took care of business. They came out and did what they were supposed to do. And once again, covered the spread, beat up on a bad Florida team, 49-17, winning by 32 points. I thought that this was a really good get right game for the Texas Longhorns. Once again, looking like one of the best teams in the country. And now, everything you want is right in front of you. It's all attainable. Beat Arkansas, beat Kentucky, beat Texas A&M. I'm not saying it like it's easy, but that's what Texas has to do. Beat Arkansas, beat Kentucky, beat Texas A&M, right? Get into the SEC championship game, and whatever happens there, you'll be in the playoffs nonetheless, but you want to win that game so you can get a first round bye in the playoffs and give yourself the best opportunity to win the national championship. And I just want to really harp back on what Quinn Ewers was able to do today with those 300 plus yards, the 5 touchdowns. I really thought it was his best game of the season. And I just love the transition, right? I love the transformation that we saw from him in terms of his aggressiveness, really pushing the ball down the field, really giving our receivers opportunities to catch the ball down the field. And we just saw a lot more juice in this offense than we've seen the last 3 games against Oklahoma, against Georgia, and against Vanderbilt. If Texas plays the way that they played today against Florida, against the next few opponents on their schedule, then Texas will be one of the toughest teams to beat in the country this season when it matters the most, in the SEC championship game and in the playoffs. More reactions on Monday, Texas to Florida, and then we get into a big rivalry game renewed, Texas and Arkansas, as the Longhorns try to navigate their way through the rest of the schedule and make it to the SEC championship game and make it as far as they can in the playoffs. Hook 'em. Peace.